Welcome to Downshift, everyone. My name is Paulo.
And my name is Matt, and we have spent the week with Mazda's second year of their CX90 plug-in hybrid. It competes with things like the Kia Sorento plug-in hybrid, the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid, but it also kind of bridges that gap to the luxury tier. You've got things like Lexus TX plug-in hybrids and the BMW X5, and of course something maybe like a GLE, but you can't really get that with a third row. But anyway, I'm going to walk you through the pros and the cons of this car.
Yes, and then we're going to get behind the wheel and talk about our standouts for the week in the CX90.
Let's get into it. But before we dive into the pros and cons, we had a go in this car last year. So this is the second model year, 2025, for the CX90. So what have they added for the second model year? Well, for starters, they've consolidated some of the trim options. They've added a sport trim, though, which gets you some of the black accents rather than the chrome, and 21-inch wheels. You now can get a second row bench available on more trims. And your 12.3-inch center screen is standard now, except for the base trim. There's no more Preferred Plus trim, and there's no more Base Turbo S trim. But with that, let's get into the pros and cons, starting with some of the cons. The first thing we have to talk about is the third row. Now, this is Mazda's biggest SUV, but it is still pretty Mazda in the third row. It's pretty cramped, there's next to no foot space, and yet you have 3 seat belts back here, so in theory, Mazda thinks you could fit 3 people back here. But you do get a couple things back here. You get some USB-Cs on either side, you get some air vents, which you don't even get in an Acura MDX third row. You get some cup holders, but again, it's just the space itself. If you have someone that's of the adult persuasion, they're not really going to be happy back here. But if you have younger or smaller humans in the third row here, they might get on just fine. But if you are looking for a more dedicated, larger third row, there are better options. Now, there's generally a lot of pros to the plug-in hybrid or the EV thing, but here, specifically, there's a couple cons that I ran into. For one, the range is good, not amazing. You get about 24 coming off the Charger that I've seen this week. The EPA rates it for slightly less, but we've got pretty, let's call it Wisconsin conditions, so the range is okay. But the real world range in the cold is going to be a little bit less, just so you know. And two, even in the EV mode, the car just feels a little bit jumpy. It's like the EV power is going through the transmission because it is, and especially when the car is cold, it smooths out a bit as it warms up. But when the car is cold, especially shifting from first into second and a little bit second into third, you really start to feel a little bit of a jerk. You also feel shifting on downshift, and it also just makes quite a lot of noises. I mean, this car makes a lot of interesting noises. Not so much as a Wrangler 4xe plug-in hybrid, but still more noises and a little bit more jerkiness than I would expect from a Mazda. So it's better, I think, marginally than it was last year. That was one of the big problems that we had with it. I think it's better than last year, but I'd have to go looking for it to tell you for sure whether it is or not. And just like the third row, and in typical Mazda fashion, the trunk just isn't the biggest in the segment. The tailgate, though, is powered, and you do get a close and lock function, which is pretty nice. The space, though, is decent. It may not be the biggest, but it is decent. With the third row up, you're looking at about 15 cubic feet of space. It's big enough for me to put my film backpack in width-wise, and that's pretty good. That's not something that you see in every 3-row. But you fold those third row seats down, and you get 40 cubic feet, and then with everything down, you're looking at 75 cubic feet of space. These are the same numbers that you're going to get in the non-plug-in hybrid. So really the only thing you're foregoing with the plug-in hybrid is the underfloor storage, because that's where the battery is. But it's also going to be exactly the same cargo measurements as you see in the 2-row CX70. The third row goes down manually, and the second row doesn't fold at all from the trunk. But there's also niceties back here. You've got bag hangers, you've got 1500 watts of AC power, you've got outlets, a number of outlets, and it's overall pretty practical. It's just not the biggest in the class, just like the third row. And just like with any car, there's just a couple of little nitpicks. The first is a Mazda staple that we've come to know and love over the last 2 years, and it's the fact that the native navigation and infotainment is only controlled through your command wheel. Now, I actually like this wheel. I like it a lot. When my wife and I both had CX-5s, we really liked that. But you shift it over to the right, and now your screen is touchscreen in Apple CarPlay, which is just a little bit odd. But once you throw it into drive, then nothing is touchscreen anymore over a certain speed. Just a little bit odd that it's one way in certain conditions and another way in other conditions. The next couple things have to do with the back row, actually. First is the massive hump that you get here. It's also a little bit difficult to rest your heels back where it normally would naturally fit because of the raised floor. And then the last thing about the second row is you have nice big bin storage for bigger water bottles and cup holders and things like that, but if those are all used up, or if you just don't want to use the door, this is not exactly the most elegant solution for cup holders, in my opinion. And Mazda is generally seen as like the driver's oriented mainstream brand, and it still relatively is. It still drives better than just about anything else in the class, the CX90, but it also means that it gives you a more tighter feeling cockpit, and that's largely due to this massive center console here. I do feel like they could have skinnied things up and better used space to give me a little bit more knee room and feel maybe a little bit more spacious here in the cabin. And one of the most annoying things about this car is the incessant chiming. Now, it is in park. The parking brake is on. I don't have my seatbelt done. I'm just going to turn the car on. That's just completely unnecessary, don't you think? So if you buy this, you have to get in the habit of putting your seatbelt on and then starting the car. And this is a small nitpick indeed, but it's left over from last year. Now this intuitively makes sense. Down and blue for cooler. But then I would want to go up and red for hotter. But it doesn't actually go up, it goes down. It is again a very, very small nitpick, but just something that threw me right away. The other thing too is there's no like fun ambient light. You get a little bit of ambient light in the cabin here, but there's no fun colors. You don't get to choose. It doesn't really show up that well at night either. It's a pretty dark cabin at night, so I might like to see a little bit of LED stripping maybe underneath here. But with all those tiny little nitpicks covered, let's talk about all the great places that the CX90 shines. But like I mentioned behind the wheel on the con side of the video, there's cons to the EV thing or the plug-in hybrid thing, but there's also a lot of pros. And I do believe in the plug-in hybrid concept here. Now here under the hood, we have a 4-cylinder engine with the hybrid motor or the electric motor kind of built in between the engine and the transmission. So even in EV mode, as we talked about, you get some of those gear changes. Some of them are more smooth than others, but overall, it's a decent experience if you just kind of know what you're getting into. 323 horsepower, 369 pound-feet of torque. This also does 0 to 60 quicker than the straight 6 inline turbo, which is pretty amazing. Again, we talked about the EV range, it's pretty decent, but the charge target button that you have here, if you can't plug the car in, will charge the battery for you. Now, of course, that's the least efficient way to drive this car. It's going to be the most thirsty, but for whatever reason, if you can't plug in and you need to drive an EV, let's say you live in other places in the world and you need to drive into the city center and they require that you're not having this engine going, maybe that's something that's beneficial to you. But overall, I do think that having 26, mid-20 miles of electric range to get you to work, maybe you have a level 2 charger there and you can charge when you get to work, or if you're just bopping over to your friend's house or your family's house, then it's probably a pretty usable range. And the truth is, it has been usable this week. Even with the slightly less range that we get from the cold weather, I'm still averaging over 50 mpg because I've been plugging it in every time I come home. So most of the time, I'm driving around on electric, but I still have that old reliable gas engine as backup if I need to go beyond the range. So really, really nice to have the best of both worlds. And then when it comes to styling, this is easily, far and away, the most handsome, the best and most beautifully designed 3-row SUV that you can probably buy. It is classic Mazda design language. It is elegant, it is clean, it is minimal while still feeling styled. You've got chrome accents all around the front splitter and surrounding your chain link grille. You've got almost BMW-esque angel eye running lights. You do have some black scratchy wheel arch cladding, which I'm not a huge fan of, but you have these fantastically beautiful wheels. Some front fender detailing and badging that designates whether you have the turbo inline 6 or the plug-in hybrid. Chrome accenting all down the body. From the side, it's pretty slab-sided, but the profile is handsome. And the rear design is maybe a little bit less handsome, but still pretty good looking and very sleek. But let's say you don't like all the chrome, you can go for the new sporty designated trim that they added this year, or you can go for the CX90 if you want to forego that smallish third row. But overall, I think it's a very, very handsome 3-row SUV. In classic Mazda fashion, what else would you expect? And then we'll talk about the overall driving experience. I do think that this CX90 brings one of the best driving experiences just purely from a balance and dynamics perspective of all the 3-row SUVs in this class. This and the Honda Pilot are probably pretty close, but it just feels solid. It feels pretty expensive. It does make some of those interesting noises, but most specifically in the non-plug-in hybrid, this is really, really nice. And even with the plug-in hybrid, I'm riding around here on EV right now. I'm past the 1-2 shift, so the shifts are happening pretty seamlessly, and it's quiet. It's refined. The steering has a nice weight to it. The body has a good balance to it. It didn't fall over in that corner back there, and it's not beating me up over these little strips of tar. in the road. So it is very, very nice. It is a rear-wheel drive first chassis, but all-wheel drive is standard on all CX90s and all SUVs in Mazda's lineup for that matter. And it's just good. The balance works. It's not a adaptive suspension, but it's a nice balanced static damper set. You do have that kinematic posturing control that we saw in the MX-5, so it does make an effort to kind of pull on that back inside wheel when you're going in a corner to keep the profile flat as you're going through a corner. It's just nice. It feels pretty natural. The seating position feels nice and organic. The seat itself is nice. The steering is good. The visibility is pretty good. It's pleasant to be behind the wheel of the CX90, I can say that much. And while it may not be perfect, the second row is a lot better and more habitable than the third row. We'll start with access. For one, the doors open 90 degrees, which is great to see and is easy to load kids and stuff in. The second row is a great size. The seats slide and recline for max comfort, and you do get heated seats back here, although not cooled, which is interesting because you'll see it in a Telluride or a Palisade. You do have the panoramic roof option here, which brings some light in, which lets you see the excellent detailing that you get from this black and tan interior spec. You do have window shades, which is quite nice, and you do have the floor hump we talked about, and I don't love the cup holder thing, but we talked about those things. Overall, the experience back here is pretty pleasant. It's definitely comfortable, and I've got everything that I could need. But a minute ago I said it was pleasant to be behind the wheel of the CX90 from a driving perspective, but it's also pleasant to be behind the wheel of the CX90 from a cabin perspective, because this is what Mazda does better than anyone else. Hyundai, Kia, Honda, Toyota, Subaru, everyone's kind of in Mazda's wake here. Mazda's head and shoulders in terms of their cabin design, quality, and build. Everything is leather wrapped. The dash here is padded leather, really, really nice. It's got this black and tan interior spec going on with the brown piping down the center of the seat and all this tan stitching. You've got these vents here on the sides that have these gold accents that almost perfectly match the tan stitching. Really, really nice. Plus you've got this kind of like anthracite BMW-esque plastic aluminum stuff for your center console and in your door cards. It's just really, really pretty. It's a minimal and clean design to a cabin that still integrates physical buttons for your climate controls. This is a clinic on how to do an interior that works and still looks very modern and very good. The only place that I will ding them is where the cup holders are. I think we could get rid of, or maybe move this center iDrive style wheel and move the cup holders back so my big bottle isn't resting up against some of the venting and blocking some of the heated and cooled seat controls. But you have heated and cooled seats, and it's really, really nice. Overall, cabin experience, 9 or 10 out of 10. And when it comes to towing, this plug-in hybrid is going to max out at 3,500 pounds, but if you want more, I believe you can get 5,000 pounds of towing in the inline 6. Another place I was pleasantly surprised with the Mazda was from a tech perspective. You got a nice big head-up display, gives you loads of information, especially when you're running your adaptive cruise safety suite stuff. You've got a fully digital instrument cluster that gives you loads of information as well, which is quite nice, and it's got some customizability along with it. And then your center screen is 12.3 inches, and that's pretty much standard on everything aside from the base trim. You love to see that. It feels modern, it feels clean, it's a nice design, and the technology works pretty well. The Bluetooth was a little spotty connecting, but now that I'm connected, it works pretty well. Wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. It's got that kind of touch screen thing when you're not moving in Apple CarPlay. The native system is not touch screen in any capacity, but once you get over a certain speed, then it goes into no touch screen for anything. You've got 360 cameras. You can get a digital rear view mirror if you option that a la carte option, and we've got a very pretty good adaptive cruise and lane keep assist system here. It's maybe not a top 5 system, but some systems are really, really, really good. And it's not to say that this one is bad. It's still good enough to be helpful. It's just not quite as cutting edge or robust as something like a Super Cruise. But still, on the highway, you throw a little lane keep on and some adaptive cruise, and you can just relax while keeping your hand on the wheel. So I like it. Overall, the tech, usually something that we ding Mazda on, but they brought it here in the CX90. It's good to see. And while we're not used to talking about price or value on the Pro side of Mazdas, they're generally the more expensive in the class. With the plug-in hybrid here, this actually represents a pretty good value related to what it competes against. Starting price is about $50,000, and the Premium Plus trim that we have here starts at $58,000 with destination and things. It's testing at just about $59,500. It's a weird slot, but it's a very Mazda slot. It's more than the Kia and the Mitsubishi economy brands, but I would expect that. But it's also a lot cheaper than the BMW and the Lexus. And the Lexus is like $25,000 more, and I'd kind of say the TX is the most similar competitor to this thing. And the reason that I bring up BMW and Lexus at all is because the way that Mazda's done their interiors and their build quality, it actually does kind of knock on the door of some of the Japanese luxury monikers like Acura and Lexus, and even BMW. So I am pretty impressed that the value proposition that this strikes with both the in-cabin refinement and a lot of the practicality. There's a very interesting button in the cabin of your CX90 plug-in. This is your charge target button. And this is because what I've been hearing is that a lot of people are buying plug-in hybrids and not plugging them in, which means they're using this button, which will allow the gas engine to charge the battery so you can use electric range later on. This is also going to be the least efficient way to drive this car. So if you get a plug-in hybrid like this or any other, make sure you plug it in. But if you don't have the opportunity to, and you need to run on electric range for some reason, you have your charge target button here. Hey guys, real quick, Matt here. Just wanted to say I hope you've been enjoying the video. If you have, would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button. I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it does go a long way in helping us get access to cars sooner and get access to manufacturer engineers so we can get more information on the cars and get you more information so you can make better decisions. So would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe, like, comment, the whole YouTube thing. But with that, let's get back to the video.
You can't get a flat bench here unless you don't do the hybrid.
Why are you saying flat bench? You could just say bench.
Bench.
Okay. Wait, what was the question? It sounds like it's revving really high.
Yeah, you know, it's at higher speeds, like the shifts between 1 and 3 don't actually seem as bad as when you're on less power.
Yeah, so that was one of the big things we noticed from last year's car. From the initial year when the car came out, we said that the plug-in hybrid felt a little bit unfinished because
Unrefined.
the EV stuff going on felt noisy and at lower speeds, especially when the car was cold. When it warmed up, it got a little bit smoother, but when it was cold, it had a tendency to jerk through shifts. So the hybrid system that's working here is between the engine and the gearbox. So you've got like an 8-speed box, so the electric power, when you're in EV mode, still goes through a transmission. So you still will get shifts, but it's specifically the 1-2 shift and the 2-3 shift that are still noticeably jerky.
Yeah, and I even experienced it not in EV mode. It just seems to be those gears, regardless of if you're in EV or leveraging the motor. But I think standouts for me this week were, in terms of the positive, it has an incredible turning radius for being a 3-row. Like,
yeah, you mentioned that a couple times.
Really good. I think the seats are really comfortable, and I really like the materials in here.
So much better than the CX5. Remember those seats?
Yes.
Yeah, these are way better. Super comfy.
I think that the materials they use, obviously, in here makes it feel like a really premium experience and product.
No, I totally agree. This is definitely the upper echelon of interior or cabin experience from a non-luxury brand.
Yes.
100% agree.
And then the last good thing I'd say is I feel like they took a step forward with the driver assist features. But with
almost too much of a step forward.
Yeah, exactly. With that being said, though, I think there were times when we both experienced it almost seems too invasive to the point where you want to turn them off, and then at what point is that like counterproductive with the whole point of the safety
how good
features?
Is a safety system if it's so good that you turn it off? It's almost like a mom and her kids leaving the house for the first time and just like overly protective. I got really hyperactive cross traffic alerts, and it was just like, okay, yeah, I know.
Yeah, and then I had the driver assist lane keep on, and it kept on binging me for hitting the outsides of the lane, and it's like, well, you're the one that's doing the lane
car,
keep.
You're the one driving.
Yeah, but you're yelling at me. I know, obviously, I'm supposed to have my hand on the wheel and obviously intervene if I see fit, but I was just trying to see how good it was at keeping itself within the lane.
Yeah.
And truthfully, it wasn't as good as I think some of the other competitors or other cars that we've been in do it, but
in the past we have dinged Mazda pretty hard for not having like a modern safety suite.
It's getting better.
So I think this is a big step forward for them. Credit where it's due. It's just, not, the top 5 systems, but it's still, I think, helpful enough to be, especially we've had terrible weather.
Yeah.
I would imagine in, most of the time in the spring, summer, and fall, when it's sunny or even overcast, but it's just dry and it can read the lanes, maybe it'd be a little bit better. Maybe I'm making excuses for it, I'm not sure.
Maybe, a little bit. I think the last two things I'll just say is the third row is kind of small, and then I wish that the steering wheel was heated all the way around versus just like,
what is that?
10 and 2.
What is that?
I think they're trying to encourage you to hold the steering wheel properly like this.
That doesn't work for you.
No.
It works for me. I just kind of hang here.
Like this?
Yeah. One of the things that stood out to me that I think we had talked about before shooting was this is almost certainly the best driving. Aside from some of the clunky gear changes, power is good. The steering feel is pretty good.
Yes.
There's a heft to it without feeling overly, heavy like in my car, or overly light in like some Hondas. I think you've got I think KPC. So there's it's not an adaptive suspension, but there's something happening with the differential in the back that kind of keeps the car more level in a corner.
Yeah.
And with that really good steering ratio, then it feels more athletic than really anything else. It's kind of this and the Honda Pilot in this class that do really well from a driving perspective. So I was impressed with that.
Yeah, I think in terms of a 3-row, I feel the most connected to the road in this for sure.
Yeah, I think it looks really good. The cabin is really nice. The driving experience is good. It's all the typical Mazda stuff, right? Design, interior, and then driving dynamics, aside from the weird powertrain stuff that I'm sure they'll figure out as time goes on. And then it's not good at the stuff that Mazda is usually not good at. It's not the biggest trunk, it's not the biggest back seat, whatever maybe. But overall,
well, and
okay.
I do like that they actually have a plug-in hybrid option, because a lot of some of the other competitors don't even offer that yet. They will in the future, but
this is surprisingly advanced for Mazda.
Yes.
So I give them credit there. Overall, I think this makes a lot of sense. It's a decent size. When we talk about the CX90 on the other side of the video, we caught a lot of flack for that, but save some money, get the CX90, and have an extra third row. You don't have to use it.
Right.
We won't reopen that wound. But thank you to Mazda for letting us have a go in your CX90 plug-in. Thank you to you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye, guys.